We'd like to start now, please. I'm David Bynum from the Department of Biochemistry and Cell Biology. It's a pleasure for me to kick off this the annual Provostal Lecture Series, and it's an even greater pleasure for me to introduce to you someone who's spent his professional career furthering science, education, research, and policies that support them. Dr. Jack Marburger.
Well, thanks to Provost Kaler, who can't be here this evening, and David Bynum and everyone else who made it possible to invite Bruce Alberts to launch this year's series of Provost Lectures. Bruce is a very special person across many, many dimensions. I'm sure you're aware of that. Some of those dimensions are on his first slide there. And as part of my introduction, I'd like to repeat some words that I was privileged to say on the occasion of Bruce's retirement after 2 terms as president of the National Academy of Sciences, which is not on that slide, but which is a significant contribution that Bruce has made. And I just want to talk about that for a few minutes because it's not something that is generally emphasized. So here's what I said, a little bit of what I said on that occasion, actually a little over 5 years ago when Bruce retired from the presidency of the National Academies. I said in my first meeting with Bruce Alberts, I recalled that he wanted to talk about how U.S. science could help solve problems in developing countries. And I wanted to talk about how we could get more good scientists to work in high-level government positions to help our own country. Our agendas often differed in subsequent meetings, too, not because we disagreed about what should be done, but because we live in different worlds where different problems surfaced on different schedules. That was when I was in the White House. What impressed me from the outset was that Bruce listened and tried to help whatever the issue was. It certainly made me more willing to listen to his issues, and I quickly realized that his instinct for what's important to science and scientists in contemporary affairs is very sound and very deep. And eventually I ended up paying more attention to the international science affairs, and the academies, of course, have a long history of interest in getting scientists to serve in government. That was in 2001, before September 11, well before I received Senate confirmation to do my job as the President's science advisor. In the aftermath of 9/11, Bruce led the academies through an initial rush of patriotic fervor within the science and engineering communities that persist to this day, and a subsequent period of concern about the impact of governmental responses to 9/11 on the conduct of science, which also persists. The first term of President Bush turned out to be one of profound global change, and I do not think Bruce's contribution to science and to the nation can be fully appreciated without understanding something of the remarkable period during which he served as president of the National Academies. I can only speak from personal experience to the last part of that period when my term in Washington overlapped with Bruce's. The most important geopolitical event in post-World War II history, the breakup of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, more or less coincided with the beginning of Bruce's term as president of the National Academies. That event precipitated a broad re-examination of the case for federal support of science, which is leading to the replacement of national security with economic competitiveness as a major driver of physical science investment, with a concomitant shift of priority from fields like particle and nuclear physics to the study of nanoscale and complex systems. Disease-oriented biomedical research grew to become the dominant feature of non-defense federal research and development. And simultaneously with these important events, the growth of the Internet, the World Wide Web, and a host of new digital and wireless electronics devices led to an extraordinary transformation of the conditions for scientific work, from laboratory practice to publishing. The face of science changed during those 12 years, but in the United States, it continued to be regarded with a level of respect that is rare among nations. Under Bruce's guidance, American science continued to function productively and with increasing attention to national needs from the earliest levels of education to the most daunting levels of national security. Since the years of his National Academy presidency, Bruce has accepted a role that is possibly equally influential in the world of science. Since 2008, he's been editor-in-chief of Science Magazine, the most widely read science publication in the country. He continues to write perceptive and persuasive editorials to keep the famous textbook current, of whose authors his name comes first, and to represent the nation's science as one of the first generation of United States science envoys. I'd just like to add that Bruce is extraordinarily effective in dealing with people, and he deals with them all in a gentle and subtly persuasive way, from kindergartners and school children all the way up through heads of state and diplomats. Somehow Bruce manages to, I wouldn't say always to get what he wants, but he makes himself understood and gives the issues that he cares about a status and a stature that makes other people want to work on them too. So Bruce, couldn't be more pleased to have you here at Stony Brook, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jack. It was a pleasure being in Washington with you. We were both saying just a few minutes ago how much better our jobs are now. Not so much pressure. I'm going to talk about basically what I learned as Academy presidents. Most of you are like I was before I went to the Academy. You're working in your day-to-day job, and you don't have an opportunity to really look around the world the way I was forced to and had the opportunity to do when I was Academy president. And so, let's see if I have this. Did I turn this thing on? I'm not sure. Okay. The years that Jack was talking about, 1993 to 2005, were really an education for me in this job, and it was a great privilege to serve. Here's some examples. The job took me to these subsistence farmers on the shore of Lake Victoria in Kenya. You can notice that I'm standing among maize plants, corn. And these were, that's pretty, farmers in Iowa would be proud to see that corn. But these were subsistence farmers who for centuries had been going through periods of starvation in their villages, not only this village, but all the neighboring villages during the period when they had no food. And this corn was a result of scientists, mostly Kenyan scientists, working with them in on-farm research to enable them to grow corn so productively that they no longer starved, and were in fact spreading that technology and selling corn to neighboring villages. Very different place. This is southern India. The building that you see there is the donated space by this village in India to set up a wireless internet facility. As part of a project I'll briefly describe. I've now visited this project 5 different times. The basic experiment, which is led by M.S. Swaminathan, a distinguished Indian scientist, is to see how modern communication technology, in this case wireless internet, can be used to improve the lives of India's poor people. There's something like 600,000 villages of 1,000 to 5,000 people, and that's where all the poverty is, great poverty in India. And here I am at one of those initial centers with one of the village women who is a volunteer with very little education, of course, was able to run this center, and she was typing away in an English keyboard and typing in Tamil. I don't know how they do this, but anyway, obviously very intelligent people. And here's how M.S. Swaminathan was trying to use science to make livelihoods and improve health, generating what, McDonald's is a franchise. It's a franchise that makes hamburgers. It makes hamburgers all around the world. And so why can't we do the same thing to to produce science franchises that actually help people while having them also make a livelihood. You can think of lots of ways you could do this in pure water, electric solar power, in this case, biopesticides. This village, like all other Indian villages, was using chemical pesticides. They had to pay for it. It causes health problems. And here, a series of, with the help of scientists from India, connected by internet to solve problems and answer questions, a group of some 5 or 6 Indian women had set up a little cooperative to produce trichogramma eggs, that is a parasitic moth that is then used as a biopesticide because it lays its eggs inside the eggs of other insects and kills them. And they were now selling this, not only getting rid of their own health problems with their chemical pesticides, but selling these in local markets. And this project has many other projects like this, growing mushrooms, dairy cows, and so on. On one of my subsequent visits, this was a really great innovation, bringing in the banks. Basically, the same way that banks finance McDonald's, local McDonald's, banks are now financing the spread of these kinds of enterprises, lending money to groups of mostly women, but some men are not disallowed, working together in so-called self-help groups, without any collateral, because they have no collateral. They can't offer their house or their car. They have nothing to offer. But this is actually making money for bankers. I had lunch right after this with the bankers, and I thought this was some good, charitable thing they were doing. But no, this was a way of them making money by loaning money in this way. And in fact, the repayment rates for these loans, they said, were better than their other loans. The man sitting next to me is M.S. Swaminathan, who is given credit for helping or leading the Green Revolution in India, production of wheat. And here's my wife handing out a check from the bankers. When you go to India, it's they think that it's very good luck if somebody comes from far away to sort of inaugurate, whether it's a book or whatever, any kind of project. So every time I go, I do this kind of stuff because I came from far away, really far away. So here's my wife giving away the checks from the bankers to the groups for their loans for their little projects. So my most important take-home lesson from my 12 years in Washington really is that science is much more important than most scientists think. We like to think that our science is important, but I never knew that science was so widely important. So many parts of the world and so many parts of society where I had never thought about science. And I'll give you some examples of that shortly. So more specifically, it's critically important that science and scientists achieve a much higher degree of influence throughout both their nations and the world. And I'll try to explain why this is, of course, important for the success of each nation, economically, to be successful, rational nations. It's also important for building a better world. And I'd like to talk about Prime Minister Nehru. The first Prime Minister Nehru, who in about 1950 talked as a great supporter of science for that country. He talked about creating a scientific temper for his nation, by which he meant for this very diverse, India has more than 50 different languages, a lot of diverse cultures, different religions. He recognized that India, like the United States, needs as much creativity, rationality, openness, and tolerance, which are inherent to science, as possible. And of course, that emphasis on science that began with the founding of that independent nation is paying big dividends today in India's economic success. So, what about the United States? 3 ambitious goals. I'm going to talk here about science education for everyone. Is to, first of all, to enable all children to acquire the problem-solving, thinking, and communication skills of scientists so they can be productive and competitive in the economy today. Second of all, to generate the scientific temper that I just talked about for our nation, with scientifically trained people in many professions, thus ensuring the rationality and tolerance essential for any democratic society. And of course, to help the United States generate new scientific knowledge and technology by casting the widest possible net for talent. Many people never would know today, growing up in the United States, that they could be a scientist or could be even a great scientist. So the first thing to say is that to accomplish these goals, I think we must radically redefine what we mean in most places by the term science education. So let me give you a little history. When I came to the Academy in 1993, we were in the midst of preparing the first ever national science education standards. This was the hardest report that the Academy ever produced. It took 4 years in all, and instead of 18 reviewers, which was what we mostly had for Academy reports, we had 18,000 reviewers, and it took a year to revise it. It's only 250 pages. I think the most important thing it did, in retrospect, because it didn't have a dramatic effect, at least not a dramatic enough effect on U.S. education, as I'll explain. But it got together the community of scientists, science educators, outstanding teachers, people who do research on education in ways that we had never done before in this country. We had the post-Sputnik reforms in education, but that was all driven by the scientific community. And this time, we got to know each other. We formed permanent bonds that I think are paying off today. So these standards had an emphasis on active inquiry of science, actually exploring the world, not memorizing. And this is what science should look like in school. This is a picture taken in middle school in San Francisco. Kids sitting around tables with four kids around the table trying to solve appropriate problems. The noisy classroom and the teacher as a coach. And this is just an example of a 5-year-old curriculum because it's fairly simple, but it shows how science can apply even to kindergartens. When I left San Francisco, this was part of the official curriculum for kindergarten. The kids go out, it has to be the right time of year, but they're given clean white socks to put over their socks, and they go out and walk in the schoolyard on the grass and under the trees. They come back, and of course the socks are full of black specks. They're supposed to take all the black specks off and lay them on a little sheet of paper in a neat roll. And because seeds have evolved to stick to animal fur, seeds will stick to socks, but so will lots of other things, dirt. So the class, these 5-year-olds, their job is to figure out which are seeds and which are dirt. And there's these little $3 plastic microscopes that every kid's given. And they look through the microscope at every speck on their piece of paper, and they draw a picture of what they see. And then the teacher says, well, what do you think? Which ones are seeds and which are dirt? And eventually, somebody will suggest that the regular shaped objects that they drew are the seeds, and the irregular shaped ones are dirt. And of course, the teacher has to restrain herself or himself from not telling the answer. This is important. And then, of course, the next challenge is if the whole class now agrees, that seems reasonable, how will we test that hypothesis? And again, it has to be a lot of patience on the part of the teacher until somebody says, well, we could plant the two types of specks and see which ones grow and which ones don't. And so, that's real science. At any rate. So it can be done beautifully, even by kindergartens. In fact, kindergartens are so excited about anything. It's a wonderful group to work with. So the vision we have is to have a science education that includes solving hundreds of such challenges over the entire time of school, from kindergarten through high school. Of course, as the kids get older, the challenges get more difficult. We already have curriculum of this type. The United States, in fact, is the leader in producing this curriculum. We produced it post-Sputnik, and then it's been modified ever since. My point would be that if children were prepared for life in this way, they'd be not only great problem solvers for the world of work, but more important even, they would be also more rational human beings people could make wise judgments for their family, their community, and their nation. Look for evidence and analyze complex situations with logic. Well, this is what I call the disaster that followed the 1996 standards. I really worked hard on those standards. I was supposed to be president of the academy. I wasn't supposed to do any work. But I spent half my time working with Rick Klausner, who later became the head of the National Cancer Institute, who I recruited to lead that effort. Every weekend we'd meet at my apartment and work on this. But anyway, it was a great disappointment. These were supposed to be voluntary national standards requested by the 50 governors. In fact, that was in 1989 at a meeting of governors led by then Governor Clinton. But since we have education as a states' rights issue in the United States, we don't have a federal education policy. Every state then was supposed to take this and make their own standards, and in many cases, including my state of California, they paid basically no attention to the national science education standards. So tremendous time is now wasted by curriculum developers trying to make their textbooks and other materials match the needs of multiple states. I've been following this. I've had kids in the public schools in California. Now I have grandkids in the public schools. The textbooks have definitely gotten worse. They were bad enough before, but now they have to meet, to sell these textbooks, they have to have things for Texas and things for California and so on. And even worse, the tests are cheap, multiple choice name recall tests. And so because we have all these different standards, we don't have any national effort to make high quality assessments. And then of course, when you add the No Child Left Behind rules and high stakes testing, what we've done really is drive science out of the schools because everybody's paying attention to mathematics and reading. So how can we recover? The Academy, after I had left, did this second report asking what have we learned as a result of that process of standards setting, and what have we learned from research about how children learn in that last decade. This report's called Taking Science to School, and there's also a popular version for teachers. These are all up on the Academy website. And these important reports claim that students who are proficient in science should be expected to do 4 different kinds of things called 4 strands of science learning. Know, use, and interpret scientific explanations of the natural world. Secondly, generate and evaluate scientific evidence and explanations. Third, understand the nature and development of scientific knowledge. Science is a way of knowing about the world. And 4, participate productively in scientific practices and discourse. And each of these 4 strands of science education were judged by the committee and the reviewers to be of equal importance. So note that strands 2 and 4 can only be taught through active inquiry. You can't have kids memorize how to generate and evaluate scientific evidence and explanations, or memorize how to participate productively in scientific practices and discourse. So some advantages of meeting this challenge, which I think is a very good one. First, we want to retain the curiosity and energy for learning that young children bring to kindergarten throughout all their years of schooling. In San Francisco, I've been a volunteer in schools. I love going into kindergarten, 2nd grade. But by the time you go to, kids are all, whatever you show them, they're interested in learning. But by the time you go to 8th grade, school has turned our kids off from learning. Second, give many more children a chance to excel at something in the classroom, which is critical for anybody's motivation. And specifically in inner city neighborhoods where the kids come to school with much less background than my grandchildren, they're always going to start out in the bottom half of the class in reading or mathematics because they just haven't had the preparation. But there's actually research that shows that some of those kids can really excel on, be the best one at making the pendulum work or making that exceed experiment work. And so we need to give a variety of chances to success for kids, even starting in kindergarten, so that they could be motivated to learn more. And of course, we want to create a nation of can-do problem solvers. Everybody talks about that. And lately, as I've been watching a little bit of television lately, we want to insulate the next generation from scams, TV rant, and talk radio. you know, I'm in a taxi often with talk radio shows on it. Our society is very complex, and there's all these people offering simple solutions for complex problems, which of course are not solutions at all, and we need to help every person deal with that world. So the good news is that this definition of science education, as elaborated in the standards and the following up reports, precisely fits the needs for workforce skills that have been widely expressed by U.S. business and industry. Here's an example of a really nice study where these authors talked to all these human resources departments of corporations and finding out what they weren't happy about and what kind of people they were looking for they couldn't find. They want people with a high capacity for abstract conceptual thinking. These are just even high school graduates. Secondly, the ability to apply that capacity for abstract thought to complex real-world problems, including problems that involve the use of scientific and technical knowledge that are non-standard, full of ambiguities, and have more than one right answer. And then the capacity to function effectively in an environment in which communication skills are vital in work groups. Well, just remember that picture of that classroom I showed. The kind of science teaching I'm talking about really would make industry happy if we did it well and students graduated from high school with those kinds of skills. One of our problems in our society is that everybody thinks they understand education. They have, especially in business and industry groups, don't actually push for the kind of science education, for the most part, that we really need. The bad news, of course, is that most science education is not like this science education I've been talking about. What we usually do, these are the 4 strands. Well, it's not easy to see, but anyway, what we usually do is know scientific explanations of the natural world. The rest of that's supposed to be in light gray, which it is on my screen, but it's not up there. So basically, we do part of one strand, and we emphasize that. And I could see that in these worksheets that my kids get at school for science, fill in the blanks over and over again. So I'm just giving you an example of what I call science education as mentioning. This is actually from a 7th grade life sciences textbook, which is probably the hardest book I've ever seen, because in 800 pages it goes over all of science, all of biology, and there are 4 to 6 bold-faced words per page that the kids are supposed to know. But there's not enough text to actually understand what they're talking about. So one of the things that California has decided in its wisdom is that all kids in 7th grade should know 12 parts of the cell. I'm a cell biologist, but anyway. And one of those parts is the endoplasmic reticulum, which I never learned about until in graduate. I was actually a professor writing a textbook. But anyway, now everybody in California should know this. And that was the bold-faced word on this, one of the bold-faced words on the page. It says, running through the cell is a network of flat channels called the endoplasmic reticulum. This organelle manufactures, stores, and transports materials. And then, of course, the next paragraph is a similar length, and it talks about the next part of the cell, which is the Golgi apparatus, and so on, so on. Okay. But to show these kids that we really understand as adults what's important in education, there's a chapter self-test. And here's a chapter self-test. It says, write a sentence that uses the term endoplasmic reticulum correctly. So we're saying as adults that this is education, and it's not any wonder that kids are turned off of school. And we're also, of course, losing many potential scientists because this has nothing to do with science, this kind of memorization. So an important challenge of the No Child Left Behind Act is that because it's much easier to test for science words than for science understandings and abilities, we have bad tests that are forced trivialization of science education and drive most students away from science. And I would say that the criterion for a good test, the crucial one, is a test that motivates good teaching and learning. I've talked to lots of experts in science assessment, Rich Shavelson at Stanford, for example. And preparing these questions is difficult and expensive. And grading the test is not $1 a kid, as you could do with a multiple choice test. But if we don't make this investment, then we're throwing away our whole investment in science education by having science education defined as memorizing and filling in blanks of words. This is a international test for 15-year-olds centered in Europe, the PISA science exam. US is part of it. And the people who made the science exam testing for this concept of science literacy with the qualities, this is from their framework that's described on this slide. And it sounds more or less the same as the taking science to school focus on, for example, last one, engages in science-related issues and with the ideas of science as a reflective citizen. So this is a nice way to see how the United States is doing in preparing kids in ways I think they should be prepared. And the bad news, of course, is that we do very poorly compared to other countries. This is just a quote from an op-ed that Tom Friedman wrote in the New York Times. This bodes very poorly for our future. I wouldn't care if this test was about memorizing a bunch of words and we did poorly, but this test is not about that. It's about thinking abilities and problem-solving abilities. So finally, there's widespread recognition that the current chaotic system, 50 different state standards, does not work. This is just a headline from Education Week about the fact that the National Governors Association has launched a push for common standards across the states. That is, the states in this movement are willing to give up their independence in making their own standards because what they did, they recognized, did not work. And we're driving now to create common standards in reading and math, and hopefully science will be next. And this is academies, the national academies have been enlisted in trying to make a framework for these standards. And this draft framework was released on the Academy website this July, and it's still being worked on. It got lots of comments and being revised. Will be released, I believe, early next year. And hopefully that will motivate the formation of common standards shared across many states. So other opportunities for change are that there are major investments promised both by the federal government and by major foundations in high-quality math and science assessments, which now become possible if we have a set of common standards that many states can use. There's now major new advanced placement course redesigns that are in progress for all the major science courses, biology, chemistry, physics. The framework for that was released last year, and it's been guided by a 2002 report from the National Academies, which said these courses, advanced placement, were not good courses. Many of the same criticisms of those courses were made as I've been making of lower level education, a mile wide and an inch deep, and so on. And I think most importantly, the idealism of many young Americans, including many young scientists. I interact with them all the time at UCSF. We've got 1,000 graduate students, 1,000 postdocs. It represents a tremendous opportunity to harness their goodwill and their energy and their intelligence. So part of doing this would be to make a science out of science education. What does that mean? So I would say that I think we probably agree that education is as important as health. But of course, we treat the two completely differently. We use evidence before we treat people with drugs, at least we hope we do. And we build up an improving sense of knowledge of how we provide medical care. But education, everybody politicizes. The California State Board of Education is no exception. They recently voted about a year or so ago to mandate that every 8th grader in the state take Algebra 1. But they didn't do any study about whether this would be possible or what kind of preparation would be needed or how long it would take to get ready to do this, and just mandate it. And this California State Board has made many past decisions of this kind, including suppressing the use of any phonics for teaching reading, which a decision they made in 1987. And that lasted nearly a decade before the mistake was recognized. So this, I would say, would be the equivalent of medical malpractice, and it's done all the time in education. And the question is why we tolerate it in the United States. So instead of flying blind, we need to use knowledge of what increases student learning based on scientifically obtained evidence to create a continuously improving education system at all levels, and that's what I mean by making a science out of education. And this will require a much more focused and effective system of research, and to be meaningful and effective, much of this research must be focused on the classroom, incorporating what our best teachers already know, and in addition, of course, make use of our best academic talent. Otherwise, we'll continue along the same track where every superintendent comes in, and they come in every 2 years or so in urban districts. They'll have their new plan and a new magic bullet for fixing something that can't be fixed without a steady, thoughtful, long-term investment. So when I was at the academy, we tried to see what we could do to contribute to the science of education. And the first attempt, which again was a very difficult, long report to get going, it was how people learn, brain-mind experience in school. This took what had been learned from the previous 20 years in psychology departments and elsewhere about how people learn, and try to interpret what that meant for school systems in teaching. And this has been a very effective report that's widely used in teacher preparation programs now, for example. The second major report that I'd like to talk about was something that led to the Strategic Education Research Partnership, or SERP. And these committees, or two of them, were asked to answer the following question. Why has research supported innovation and continuous improvement in medicine, agriculture, and transportation, but not in education? And what can we do about it? So oversimplifying, these committees had CEOs, superintendents of schools, teachers, education researchers on it, scientists. Just to oversimplify their conclusion, is the central point. Education is missing the equivalent of the teaching hospital in medicine. That is what they call a field site. Places where researchers, teachers, and designers work in practice settings to observe, explain, document, replicate, and evaluate practice as a source of new knowledge, define problems and test solutions in context, and train new researchers and practitioners for what they call use-inspired research and development. We have a big education research enterprise in this country, but most of it is not connected to the real problems of schools. And one of the fundamental points that this committee made is that to be believable, research and education needs to be done in real school settings. And second of all, it has to work on problems that school systems recognize as important and ask for solutions for, not just problems that professors think might be interesting to answer. And that led to this field site idea. One of the field sites is in San Francisco. The first one was in Boston. And this is a field site meeting in San Francisco, which I attend whenever I'm there, which is not that often. But it's an all-day meeting of some 30 people, only some are shown here. Half of them are professors from UCLA, Stanford, Berkeley, UCSF, and so on. And they're some of their postdocs and graduate students, and the other half are people who work for the school district who are in charge of science or middle schools or whatever, because the problem that San Francisco identified as the thing they wanted to work on most importantly was middle school science and mathematics. Well, the Boston team started a little earlier, and the problem that was identified for them was something I had never heard of called adolescent literacy. It turns out that Boston recognized that so many kids were dropping out the first year of high school because they couldn't understand the textbooks they were reading. And yet we don't normally teach reading after 4th grade. And so that's led to a whole enterprise in trying to see how we can get kids to read for understanding, not just to decode, which is the 4th grade level, but to read for understanding. And that has led to the first free product that's been distributed on the web by SERP, the product that was created in Boston called Word Generation, that's now being used actually pretty widely around the country to try to intervene in middle school, and now it's going to move to even lower levels to stress reading for understanding. And this is just the website of SERP where you could read more, but it's, I think, a very promising development. So there's also the critical issue of teacher empowerment. Some of you may remember that some 30 years ago, U.S. industry learned from the Japanese that building a better automobile requires listening to workers on the assembly line. That is, ground truth is essential for wise decision making. And having been involved with school systems for many years, I conclude that education is one of the few parts of our society that has failed to exploit this fact. So what keeps me up at night is, first of all, that our best teachers need to have much more influence on the education system. Current trends will drive these talented people into more lucrative and respected careers. This influence is needed at every level, from school districts to states to the federal government. So the question is, how can we institutionalize such an influence as needed to create a continuously improving education system? And when I was at the academy, I'm a very slow learner. I was there for 12 years. It took me 8 years to recognize that just putting teachers on committees that were studying an education problem was not enough. Because one of the things the academy president does, you have to sign off on every committee doing whatever study it is for the United States government. We do some 200 of those a year, huge number of studies for on all kinds of topics. But whenever it was an education topic, I'd send the committee slate back until they had 4 outstanding teachers on the committee. But it didn't really work, because the other people on the committee, 8 or 12 of them, were mostly academics, and academics know how to talk and intimidate other people. But at any rate, they didn't listen to the teachers. So to get a louder voice for teachers, we formed finally, in my last 4 years, a group of 12 of the best science and math teachers in the country, a rotating group called the National Teacher Advisory Council, which now advises on every education program and helps the teachers on the committee have a louder voice. These people are incredible. You know, almost any one of them could be a CEO of a company. They're very, very remarkable people. And one of the things they recommended was state associate councils to the national one, because the teachers point out that states make most of the education policies. And so they made a liaison group to states, and the first state Teacher Advisory Council group formed was in California, and it's designed to make connections between the best science and math teachers in California to legislatures and education leaders in Sacramento and to industry. And it's early days, but I think it's going to be very effective. And I would argue that every state needs such a group. And so now we're getting really to near the end of my talk, and the appropriate audience for this is right here. Because to remove a major barrier to progress, science education at the college level must change. This next slide is taken from an Academy report, and it shows the influence, the complex influence of our education system. Note almost all the arrows point at the teachers here. The main point is, when I came to the Academy and I wanted to do something about education, many of my members of the Academy would say, well, we can't do anything until we fix something else. Textbooks, the colleges of education, the unions. So we really have to, give up on this or wait until something else happens in our society so we could have an effect. They forgot that, in fact, they're the people who teach the teachers science, the faculties of arts and sciences, and they are the people, by teaching, say, biology 1, that define for everybody else, parents and future teachers, what science education is. So I came to recognize during my 12 years in Washington, one of the sort of wake-up lessons I got was, in fact, college teaching may be the most important thing we could do, changing it along the lines that are recommended in those documents I talked about earlier. Most important and effective things we could do to change the nature of science education at lower levels. So the Academy runs a workshop sponsored by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in Wisconsin for teams of Biology 1 teachers. It's been going on for numerous years. And here I am learning how to use clickers, which I then took to my medical school class the next year. But I wasn't supposed to be there. I was just visiting because you're supposed to be a Biology 1 teacher at college. So here's my sort of take-home message for professors. In my opinion, the primary aim of any undergraduate introductory science course, whether in biology, chemistry, physics, or earth sciences, should be to enable students to appreciate and participate in science as a special way of knowing about the world. Our goal as teachers and educators should be to expose our students to the discovery process and to excite them about challenges at the frontiers of knowledge. We should try to make students understand why it's crucial that any scientific result be confirmed by other scientists, and why a scientist can never be sure that he or she has the final answer about anything. And when I was here earlier today, I learned about your really interesting and important programs in changing the nature of introductory science courses. And I think you're to be commended, and I think you have an opportunity here to become a national leader in this important endeavor. The other issue, of course, is to spread science, we must spread scientists. I claim that we need scientifically trained people in all professions as the connectors between science and the very different cultures of government, pre-college education, law, the media, business, and so on. And so we need to encourage a broader pipeline from college and university science departments, encouraging people to take science for many different reasons and trying to enable them to prepare for many different professions. This is not something that is common in science departments in academia. In fact, I started out as an assistant professor at Princeton. I was there for 10 years, and I feel very guilty about it, but I just accommodated to the prevailing ethos was that we should try to make our first year courses very hard, scare off all those students who wouldn't be professors or couldn't be professors, and so we could only deal with people just like ourselves. This was wrong in many ways, but I don't have time to go through them all, but I think this is just backwards. So this university, by initiating a new PhD program in the field of science education through your Center on Science and Math Education, is helping to lead a new emphasis on this issue by U.S. scientists. I think we are really starting to wake up. In response to President Obama's strong interest in this issue of science and math education, and nobody really knows where this came from, except that his mother really was a scientist, an anthropologist. The President's Council on Science and Technology, so-called PCAST, will be releasing a forceful report on science and math pre-college education this month. I was on the subcommittee preparing this, so I know about it. This report is entitled Prepare and Inspire, and it's designed to bring new resources to efforts like the ones you're involved in and many others, and let's hope that it's successful. This is the important point about spreading scientists. When I was in Washington, and Jack can certainly testify to this, Jack Marburger, is that when we're trying to, Academy wrote 200 reports a year, and write a report about giving advice to the Department of Agriculture or whatever. That advice has to be adapted and interpreted for whatever government, part of government or Congress is its receptor, and that interpretation is by far best done by a scientist who's gone into that government committee or that office of the Department of Agriculture and can relate both ways to the scientific community in one direction and to their different culture in the other about what science means, what the science needs are for its agency or their committee, and what science means for their work. And there's really nothing to replace even one person on a congressional committee who's a scientist with that adapter function can make a huge difference. And so that's part of the argument for getting scientists out to many different professions and to continue to include them in our community by inviting them back to the science departments and universities so they can benefit from the strength of our enterprise. So here's a specific challenge. Can the United States create training or certification process to convert PhD scientists into science curriculum specialists that school districts would want to hire? I know from experience that school districts badly need such an inside person with science and his or her soul to connect them to the enormous outside resources and goodwill that exists to aid school science in the United States, including the local scientific and engineering communities. And I also know from talking to many students and postdocs at UCSF that there are many talented and energetic science graduate students and postdocs who would be interested in a career if a productive new pathway for entry could be developed and promoted. So in a way, that's a challenge to this university and many others. So I'm going to end with my current job. How can Science Magazine help to promote the needed revolution in science education? Well, it's great to have control of the editorial page. I don't write I only write about 10% of the editorials, but anyway, this is one on redefining science education, something I've been talking about. We also, every year, have a special issue on education. First one was about education and technology. This year was about the connection, what we know from research and from science, about the connection between learning science of the kind I described and increases in literacy and reading and language abilities. Turns out that kind of science that you saw in that picture in the classroom is a great way, we know from research, of teaching kids how to read, write, and communicate. And then we have had, for 2 years, a competition with one winner announced each month for the best free science education websites. There's wonderful things on the web, but nobody knows about them because there's so many other things. These are lost. So our idea was to try to highlight, and there'll be 24 of these highlighted by the end of the year. And just in ending, this is not just a US effort. Through the academies around the world, and this is the former president of the Chilean Academy here, scientists are cooperating in a worldwide effort to spread the kind of education for children that I'm talking about everywhere. In fact, some countries can move much faster than the United States because they have federal systems of education. The French Academy, even though they started after we did, have now managed to spread hands-on inquiry-based science learning for children into what they say is 40% of all the children in France, for example. But this is also happening in a variety of other countries as well. And this is the promise of world science collaboration. This is one of my favorite pictures. 15 Academy presidents had been working together in Switzerland to try to design a new organization. I'm not going to talk about it for academies. And we got up at like 5 in the morning, and this is like 7 in the morning going back to the airport. And if you see it, look at the cups, we're the Swiss McDonald's. and this is just the people who happen to be in this picture. The president of the Indian Academy of Sciences, Japanese, Chinese, Swedish. And the fact is that all of us have exactly the same goals and exactly the same complaints about our governments, that our governments take short-term advantage and don't do the right things over the long term and so on. We are really a wonderful community to help create a better world. And of course, that's part of my job as Science Envoy, is see how we can use that community to effectively create goodwill for the United States and more effective partnerships between nations. So this is my last slide. It's from a book called Science and Human Values by a physicist, Jacob Bronowski. Bronowski was part of the army after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was somehow assigned to fly over after the bombs had fallen. It deeply affected his view of science in the world and made him think and work for 10 years to ask, was science a good thing or a bad thing? And he wrote this wonderful little book, which is still in print as a paperback. And this is a quote from it. He said, "The society of scientists is simple because it has a directing purpose to explore the truth. Nevertheless, it has to solve the problem of every society, which is to find a compromise between the individual and the group. It must encourage the single scientist to be independent and the body of scientists to be tolerant. From these basic conditions, which form the prime values, there follows step by step a range of values: dissent, freedom of thought and speech, justice, honor, human dignity, and self-respect. Science has humanized our values. Men have asked for freedom, justice, and respect, precisely as a scientific spirit has spread among them." Thank you. I can't see anything. I'm afraid I'll fall off the steps if I try to.
Don't go. Are you willing to take a few
Yeah,
questions?
sure. Oh, it would be good to have some lights, yeah.
So while you're thinking of your questions, let me ask Bruce to just describe a little bit about what the science, the U.S. science envoys do, how it's structured, and,
Okay.
and what are you actually doing now?
Good question. So if you really want to know, we tested, 3 envoys gave a presentation to the PCAST, President Council of Advisors of Science and Technology. I think it was in July, anyway, well, maybe September. I don't remember what month it was. The meeting before lunch, I think it was July. Anyway, and it's all video cast and a webcast, which gave some short talks. But basically, the idea is to make visits. I've been to Indonesia, for example, for 2 weeks. Try to connect to the needs of Indonesia in ways that will create new ties between our 2 countries using science as the vehicle. And for example, in Indonesia, we're starting a program called Frontiers of Science, which we are 2 academies, the Indonesian Academy of Science and the U.S. Academy of Science, will jointly oversee. Our academy already has such a program with China, Japan, India, and Germany, and this will be a new program. And like those programs, it will bring 40 of the future leaders of American scientists together every year with equivalent 40 people from Indonesia in this case. Future leaders are defined as people between 40 and 45 who've already been independent long enough that it's clear that they're going to be successful. And those meetings are organized by a executive committee from both sides, representing both groups of young people. And they've been very effective in producing long-term cooperation between different people in the 2 countries, and also strong personal ties. Another important endeavor, and this was defined by Ambassador Hume as his most important objective, is to get many more young Indonesians over to the United States for their education. Today, in a country of 270 million people in Indonesia, there's only about 7,000 Indonesians in the United States for education. It used to be many more. So those kinds of ties, you know, are long-term issues that create understanding and cooperation between nations. Incidentally, the Frontiers of Science that we started with China was in Beijing, and I went to the first one. And one of the leaders on the Chinese side, the young scientists leading their group, was a man by the name of Chen Zhu. He was a wonderful biological scientist, but today he is a minister for health in China, one of only 2 minister who's not a Communist Party member, and we have wonderful connections to him, and this kind of personal ties between Americans and leaders from other countries is going to be invaluable to help create a more rational future world and bridge gaps of understanding.
Questions from the audience? Any? Go ahead, in the back there. Yes?
Okay.
Sir, I'm from India and I went to high school in India. And I'm trying to understand the high school education system here in the U.S. The problem that I'm facing here is at the high school level, the students are learning one subject at a time in each class. So for example, art sciences in 8th grade, and they're done with it. 9th grade comes chemistry, they're done with it. Physics comes in 10th grade, and lastly environmental science comes in the 12th grade. By the time they are a senior in high school, they've already forgotten what art science was. In high school, in India, it's a different thing. It's a progressive thing. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, every subject is taught every year, and it's a progressive science learning curve. So if you ask a student in 10th grade, what is Charles' law that you learned in 8th grade, he will remember. So, I mean, how do we
Well, there are many ways to create good education systems. I think just watching my grandchildren, my major conclusion, and I tried to get this into the PCAST report unsuccessfully, but I will write an editorial about it, is that we need something that allows kids to really go into depth into something that they're excited about. And because I was a Boy Scout and then later a Boy Scout leader, I thought immediately of merit badges we have in Boy Scouts. I don't know, how many of you were Boy Scouts? How many were Girl Scouts? Anyway, the point would be, we would call them, say, science awards or something. I have a grandchild, for example, who's really interested in reptiles and snakes, but you can't do anything in school about that. So, but if there was say 100 different science certificates you could work for, and much of this would be done outside of school with volunteers. You could use the web for tutoring and for assessing who passes. I think kids should have a chance to do something. I think the most important thing that I can remember from my education is when I had a project and I did something, and then suddenly I came to understand it. I can now remember it. I can't remember anything else. So this report talks about common standards in science, and it also talks, that's the preparation. And then remember the name of the report that's coming out is Prepare and Inspire. And then it talks about, in nice ways, about non-standards. Non-standards are supposed to inspire. And they talk in general about going to museums and all kinds of good stuff. But I think myself, having watched the education system, that if we had some way of rewarding kids and rewarding schools on the basis of some science award that their kids would get, and this would be a much more effective way of really moving us beyond just a platform of standards to kids doing a few things that they're really excited about in depth. And at any rate, there's some other people in Washington who think this might be a good idea too. So the question is how we would do it, and this is a long conversation. But I really think that school is so different today for kids than it was for me. I remember I went to school, this is almost before television was invented. There was nothing to, I was bored when I was home. There was 2 hours of television, it wasn't any good. And otherwise I'd look around the house for some book or something, and there's nothing. But now they're connected to everything. We got to make school exciting, otherwise they're not going to be excited about it. And school, for most kids, doesn't seem to be exciting. And so the big problem to me is how we get kids, give them a chance to challenge themselves with something that they could do in depth. If it was nationally certified, like there's about 100 merit badges, for example, in Boy Scouts. If there was something like 20 different things you could do in 4th grade through 6th grade, and there were 50 different things you could do in middle school, and another 50 things you could do in high school, I think that if we did that well, it would change the nature of the way kids think about education. Because education is not memorizing, Golgi, endoplasmic reticulum, mitochondria. I mean, this is not education. And if you look, some of my talks I give an education. I have a quote from the Princeton Review for the biology SAT-2, which is what we used to call the achievement test for biology. And this quote written by adults for kids in school says, just memorize everything in this guide. We'll teach you don't have to know anything. You don't have to understand anything. You just have to know. ATP, more oxygen. Anyway, I think this is criminal what adults are doing to kids, because as I said, when they come to school as 5-year-olds, even up to 2nd grade, they're so excited. You bring magnetic filings into a 2nd grade and they get all excited and revved up, and by the time kids are in middle school, most of that seems to be gone. So the real challenge to me is keeping that alive. You had a question? Yeah?
Yes. How do you think race to the top does or will fit or not fit with the vision you were discussing?
So I'm not, I know Race to the Top is putting lots of money in. It's one of the things it's doing is it's getting states, because they have to compete, to push back on the teachers' unions so that lifetime employment is not guaranteed, which I think is something useful, to have merit-based school jobs in school systems. But there's a lot. Education is so complicated. They're doing a lot of good things. They're going to make better assessments. Certainly, we want better assessments that will measure things that count instead of just words. There's not going to be any simple answer to anything. I would like, in any education policy that's made, to have it proposed as something we're going to try, because the system is so complicated. Whenever you perturb it, crazy things happen. No Child Left Behind started out as what seemed to be a good idea, but it turned out to be corrupting. I mean, half the kids in the state of Texas drop out of high school because the high schools don't want them to be on their test scores. I mean, things like this. So I think that we have, first of all, like we would, education is at least as complicated as a cell. So as we would do as a cell biologist study, we try to do something that we think will be useful, but we really make the investment in the kind of research that I talked about when I mentioned SERP, to actually give us rapid feedback about what's really happening in the schools. And we give the best teachers a voice, a powerful voice, but to tell us what's really happening as well. So if we had done that with No Child Left Behind, we could have corrected it much earlier. Now we sort of, 10 years, 12 years later, we say, well, now we'll make a new one and we'll try to avoid those problems. But I don't think we're ever going to get it really right. And we have to admit that education is so complicated, we need to have a continuous loop of high quality assessment by education researchers working in school districts to tell us really what's happening and how could we change the policies to make things better. And of course, instrumental of that is a voice for the very best teachers who really know. I mean, I've seen many, they really know how to make their system better, and it's so frustrating because nobody listens to them. As I said, school systems are one of the few parts of our society that are very hierarchical in most places. And so at any rate, I think it's a long way of saying that Race to the Top starts with lots of good intentions, but it's certainly going to create the same kind of problems, if we're not careful, that any other major policy creates. And we need to keep revising the rules and learning from what happens at the ground level.
One more question. Front row.
You spent about an hour talking about many wonderful ways that education might be done. And then you spent about a minute, a little while ago, talking about your own childhood.
Yeah.
And that makes me think there's a certain irony about the diversity of education around the world. We rank so low. So are we so low relative to the rest of these cultures because there are 15 or 20 or 25 models of culture and education that are better than us? Or is it that somehow we've deteriorated your childhood? And what about that? Is that more important perhaps than what anything we could do now. I guess that's a skeptical way of saying that I wonder, I worry whether there's something beyond just the specifics of education.
Yeah. These are ancient issues. If you read John Dewey, he's saying exactly what we say today. So these are ancient issues. I guess I would say the trouble with what we've done in recent years is it's sort of one size fits all. And I'd like to get a lot more diversity in our system and a lot more motivation for kids to do things that are motivating for them and interesting to them. And what I said about my own education obviously influences the way I think about it, because if I think back in my own education, you know, I can remember a lot about the merit badges I did. I was doing something in depth. I can remember when in 7th grade I had a great science teacher. What he did is he had each of us learn something and teach it to the rest of the class. And I supposedly learned how a television works. That was new. And, you know, boy, that was incredible for me. I realized how complicated the television was, and tried to put that in words that the kids could get some. So there are all kinds of, anyway, I could go on like that, but there are all kinds of things that I think we could do much better, including having kids teach other kids. I've been talking here today about the program that Dick McCrae, who's a member of the Academy of Astrophysicists at the University of Colorado, started there, called Learning Assistance. And you're doing some of the same things. This is such a powerful thing. They take the very best students in the previous course, freshman course in his case it was astronomy. He was teaching a non-majors course in astronomy. He took the very best kids and made them learning assistants for the next year's course. And he spent most of his time with the learning assistants teaching them how to run small group sessions and teaching them what was known about teaching. And they've done really extensive studies at the University of Colorado. I was just there, but you know, showing that these kids are really effective in ways that graduate students aren't, because they just learn the subject and they could convey what kids don't understand better than people who understand it very well, like the professors. But even more importantly, it's so empowering for them. Anybody who's ever taught knows that the best way to learn is to teach. And the other thing it's doing is all of a sudden they're getting a substantial number of people, something like 50 kids now, who want to become science teachers. And so this is a great demonstration of the fact that we could make use of older kids teaching younger kids. Our system is so unimaginative that I think there's great opportunities. And so if I was a young person, I'd be excited about sort of working on these problems. I know Teach for America has been criticized by many people because they take really energetic young people and throw them in the very difficult schools. To me, the most important thing about Teach for America, which was completely unanticipated even by Wendy Kopp, is that they now have something like 16,000 alumni. And those people are going into all kinds of positions as leaders, and if they're lawyers, they know what schools are like. But many of them are starting new charter schools and things like this. Basically, getting some of our most talented people into the field of education, I think, is a great contribution to the country, because getting to Teach for America is incredibly hard. 10% of the last time I looked, 10% of the class at Caltech applied to be in Teach for America, and they only took a fifth of them. And they're selecting for leadership, and they're selecting for other things besides just grades. This reminds me of one thing. So I went to Singapore. There are many. The world's doing all these wonderful experiments that we have to learn from. Singapore, everything's on the basis of an exam. If you do well enough on some game, these kids are tutored and they know all this stuff. And I went to this, so they know a lot. And so then at the end of high school, they take this exam, and they send, I think, 200 people a year. It's been $1 million on each of them to send them to college in the United States, graduate students in the United States. And now they're coming back as PhDs to work in Indonesia, so in Singapore. They have to come back for 5 years. So is that the way to select the future scientists? I don't actually think so, because if we looked at our own, we've done a study of our own graduate students looking back. we're trying to, you know, we trying to say, who should we take to our graduate school? And the people who've been most successful are not the people with the highest scores on those GREs, not the people with the highest grade average. There's something very different about, you know, you could be but you know, people who've been very successful in a research laboratory, that seems to be the best test. But you know, we want to encourage people to display whatever talents they have in a large variety of different ways and rise to the top in whatever they do. Because, you know, people have different abilities, something I learned when I was teaching graduate students. And the whole thing about education for me is to find out what you're good at, what you enjoy doing, and then for the student to head in that direction, for the faculty to help them get there, because everybody has different talents and abilities.
Bruce, thanks very much for giving us so much of your time.
Way too long. Okay. Oh, I might get a T-shirt.
Good guess. For Dr. Albert's leadership and vision and commitment, I'd like to make him an honorary member of our Center for Science and Mathematics Education. And now you are one. Thank you.
Well, what did you do as a young kid?